much for joining us. I'm really excited to talk to the three of you today about all that you've been learning in growing your businesses. So to get us started, why don't each of you introduce yourselves, your companies, the stage of growth that you're at, your sizes, just to give the audience a bit of a sense in terms of where you're at in your journeys.
Sure. So my name is Jocelyn Brown. I'm the SVP of Customers and Revenue, which is sort of functionally the CRO at Allocadia. It's a Vancouver-based SaaS company supporting marketers in their planning, investment strategy, and then ultimately insight into their marketing dollars. We're Series B, so the last round we raised was in the fall of 2016. So we're at that sort of scale stage.
My name is Aman, human first, and then bench warmer at Procurify. We're at about 130 people now in Vancouver. We're at similar stage of Series B. We help companies make business spending smart and simple, so removing expenses, removing purchasing inside an organization, kind of taking it to from that probably back office, boring space to bringing it to the front end with the new space of tech involvement in business processes. So excited to be here and hopefully say something of use. Pass it on.
Hi everybody, I'm Andrew Graham. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Borrowell. We help consumers make great decisions about credit. So if you ever wondered where you stack up, what your credit score is, what's in the credit report that banks see, you can sign up for our app. We have over 1 million consumers, well over 1 million consumers using the product. We've been around for about 5 years. We have 80 employees and closed a Series B in the early part of this year, based in Toronto.
All right, thanks and welcome to the three of you. To get started, I just want to talk a little bit about the speed and scale that you guys have been through. Obviously, sort of beyond that initial startup phase, and things are moving very quickly, which is a real key to growth. How are you navigating the different ways that your organization changes and the new sort of problem sets that you're seeing? And while you're doing that, how are you bringing all your stakeholders, your investors, your employees, and your customers along with you?
It's a big question. So I'll take some of it. So for me personally, actually, probably I lean on my networks, lots of them here and just in general, to understand some of those phases if you haven't been through them. I was lucky enough to work at Eloqua through the scale phase, so I saw the 10 to 100 kind of path. At the time, I wasn't on the executive leadership team, so I had a bit of a seat at the table, but I wasn't right there. So I lean on others a little bit to know what's coming ahead so you can see around the corner and prepare for it. A lot of it's about coaching yourself out of the doing in many cases and getting used to that. In terms of the rest of the stakeholders, I think probably as you'll read and hear from lots of places, especially through this particular stage, and Mike talked about it this morning, but you end up having your management team changes actually quite a bit. So a lot of it's also just spending a lot of your time understanding what leader you need for the next stage, making sure that you know them before you need them. So I think probably I spend more time recruiting on lots of different fronts. And half that's learning and half that's actually recruiting so that I can be ready when I actually need that next level leader.
And just on that, how far in advance are you looking for those roles?
It depends on the role, but I've probably been recruiting one for at least a year ahead. I can see when I probably need it. And some of those hires are so critical and they're such a big change for you that you want to have a very long interview process where it's much more of a partnership going into it rather than an actual recruiting process. For some of those really senior positions and board positions or otherwise, it should be a longer and much deeper kind of recruiting process. So I start pretty early.
All right, thanks. And Aman, same thing, kind of how are you helping navigate for you on your own through all of these changes and bringing your team along with you?
I was kind of wishing you weren't going to ask that question because I'm going to be very honest and transparent. Fucked up so much along the way. I'm a first-time founder into this process, and oh my God. God, hindsight and just learning everything at scale is pretty intense. And David Cancel talked about like mental health and the challenges, and especially when you've got to like 180 sometimes your company when you're making those pivots or changes. I learned a lot this year. We gained some really strong leadership on the product side, and I learned that great leadership is really just about bringing people in, number one with the value set, that's critical. But then you can model great behaviors and habits from the way they interact with the organization. And I found something really valuable was just watching them interact and actually operationalizing that across the board in the company, like taking their habits and just mimicking that across the board, because you can find a nice pattern or repetition of how they're improving their certain teams or their skill sets with their individual support team members that they're working with. But personally, skilling, like I said, it's just, you have to be vulnerable and honest and transparent with yourself and with the organization to like get that self-awareness of repetitively focusing on reverse engineering your decisions that you made and trying to improve that just as fast as possible into the next decision you make. So that's all we're doing every day.
All right, so learning on the job and learning from each other and trying to mimic those habits too. And what about you, Andrew?
Similarly, there's definitely a lot of mistakes that we've made along the way. I think we've talked about scaling the team, and that's certainly a big theme. We've even found that we've had to really change our approach to how we build product. So in the early days, when you're really just trying to find product market fit, reliability doesn't necessarily have to be as big a deal. So when we were a small company, we could afford to make a lot of UI UX changes very quickly and just sort of put them in production to see what worked. And I remember a couple years ago when we were starting to have a bit of scale, we put a change into production quickly, and it sort of broke our sign-in flow. And we realized, it took us an hour or two to realize it, and we fixed it. And we had like 5,000 people try to log in the course of time and all not be able to log in. And it was a moment of realization to say, I think we need to sort of change our priorities here and really build a lot more QA into what we're doing, even if it's at the expense of being able to move as quickly. So we realized at that point we had to enter a different phase with a different set of priorities. I think choosing what you're going to focus on is really key and has to change a lot as you get larger.
And on the side of product, when do you think that really changed for you guys? Like, was it after a couple iterations? Was it a certain team size? Like, when do you think in the journey you kind of came upon that realization?
We really, our product vision has changed over time, and what we do has changed. We started off as a prime lender making loans for people with good credit. Then we introduced free credit score, and that really took off as a mass product. So we now have over 1 million consumers who have checked their credit score with us. And so we've gone from being sort of like an episodic, apply for a loan every once in a while business to one where people are logging in some cases weekly, daily, whatever. So we have had to, sort of rebuild our product and rebuild infrastructure to be able to handle, tens of thousands of logins, hundreds of thousands of logins over a short period of time. And so that takes a bunch of sort of catching up to do.
Yeah, and certainly the sooner you can do it right, the less you have to rebuild later. All right. We touched on it a little bit already on hiring, but I definitely want to ask you about that as we think about growing our teams, growing them quickly, and just what are we going to need to get to the next stage. I think often we're doing that a little bit retroactively. Hopefully we can be proactive about it. How vital has the hiring strategy been for you at different times during your growth? And are there any areas that you would really dedicate focus to at different stages? Like kind of when do you really focus on sales or HR, et cetera?
Yeah, that has the presumption that we did it right in the question a little bit. So I would say that, I grew up in software and customer success, so for me, getting the post-sales organization right was very important for me, and that's really how I came in there, and that has a lot to do, I think you talked a little bit about values, that has a lot to do with the company values and making sure we are investing enough there, because that will get you through some of your product gaps potentially. And I also just believe that certainly for us, we're an enterprise, we sell to the enterprise, we're a relatively high touch model, it matters a lot. So for me, getting the right team dynamic and the right people there was critical. I would say we hired, so some of the sales and go-to-market positions, I think we probably didn't do well the first time. And recalibrating, resetting, doing it right, and then investing much more heavily in onboarding, particularly in the sales organization, was our reset. And, wish we'd figured that out the first time. Just the amount of onboarding you need, especially when you're scaling an enterprise sales team outside of co-location, becomes really critical. So I think probably we got it better the next time, I think, because we were trying to add lots of sales headcount, and you can't do that without having the infrastructure to make it possible for them to succeed, and they are the front of the tip of the spear. And so for an enterprise selling organization, that matters a lot. And I don't think you can underinvest, or rather overinvest in it.
Right, to get the structure right before you multiply the problem, essentially.
Yeah.
Fair. All right.
Look, one thing that I found really hard is timing when to hire new senior leaders in your company. So I would say most of the time we wait until we have waited until there's some sort of clear pain when it's like, wow, we really need someone to elevate where we are in product, for example. Occasionally, we've actually, often through luck more than genius, actually hired just ahead. So, for example, relatively early in our growth, we were looking for our first talent hire, our first HR hire. We thought we were looking for a recruiter, and then we ended up meeting our current VP talent, Larissa Holmes, who has, I think, a very broad skill set. And we were really excited about what she could bring even beyond recruiting. And it was so powerful when we were like a 30-person company, having quite a senior, experienced head of talent. That really, I think, prevented a bunch of problems that we would have had. But I didn't realize going into that search that the right call was actually to hire someone more experienced and more senior versus someone who had a more narrow skill set, which is what I thought we needed going into it.
All right. Do you have a...
Yeah, no,
You're looking at me like,
agree.
don't make
I was
me...
just going to say, if you can find a people person immediately, do it. Because they can start codifying how to look at your values and how well you do against people churning or people, the hiring process, or creating a pipeline for recruiting. I think it's critical. And I'll say, I don't know how Lightspeed got JP at 40 people, but I mean, whenever you can find an amazing leader that you think has some experience and you can afford them, I would take them at any point. They will find a way, the right people will find a way to create value inside the organization as first principle thinkers if you get it right. So for me, it's just hire whoever you can if they're great.
And how do you frame right for you?
I really go on the first principle thinker mindset. Just experience is great, but if the person's my language, an asshole, they're gonna screw up your company. You're gonna find out 6 months from later, right? So finding somebody who has the values, but who will just come in and willing to get their hands dirty, coach people, just solve problems, I think that is the #1 critical, because your organization is changing at minimum every 6 months, but it's continuously iterating on itself, and so people who are dynamic in that change and can just solve problems, or look at figuring out what the right questions to be asking are, I mean, that's more critical than anything else, and I think those people are like rock stars. They can be inexperienced or experienced leaders.
Thank you, guys.